At 3 in the morning, on the 17th of November, Pope Leo XIV broke the most important unspoken rule of the Vatican. He went where the Pope is never supposed to look. He did not tell his Secretary of State. He did not tell the Swiss Guard. He took off the white zucchetto, put on the plain black cassock of an ordinary parish priest, and walked out of his apartment alone. In his inside pocket, against his chest, he carried a single sheet of paper. It had arrived 3 days earlier, slipped under the door of his private chapel during morning meditation. No signature. No letterhead. 4 lines, typed on a manual typewriter with a slightly skewed lowercase e. The first line read, "Holy Father, the palace you live in is cleaned by ghosts." The second line read, "They sleep on cardboard between the boilers." The third line read, "One of them has polished your floors for 40 years and cannot heat her room tonight." The fourth line read only, "Go down and see." He had read those 4 lines 200 times. 40 meters below his bedroom, in a service corridor that no cardinal had walked through in 30 years, a 72-year-old woman named Maria Esposito was on her knees, scrubbing a stain that no one would ever notice. She did not know that the new American Pope existed in any way that touched her life. She was about to find out. What he was about to discover beneath that palace, in the next 11 minutes, would force him, by sunrise, to dismantle a hypocrisy that had stood, undisturbed, since the reign of Sixtus V. This is what happened in those 11 minutes. And, in the breakfast that followed, to understand why one man's walk down a service staircase shook the oldest institution in Europe, you have to understand one simple contrast. The Vatican Bank, whose vaults sit beneath the tower of Nicholas V, had reported that autumn total assets of 5.4 billion euros. The women who polished the floors above those vaults were paid 4 euros and 11 cents an hour. That figure did not appear in any official Holy See budget. It appeared in an internal report bound in pale green cardstock labeled Allegato Tecnico 17 bis, prepared by an auditor named Dr. Enrico Salvi. 3 weeks after he submitted it, Dr. Salvi was quietly transferred to a diocesan archive in Sardinia. A photocopy of his report reached Pope Leo's desk on the 11th day of his pontificate. It was placed there, without comment, by a Swiss Guard sergeant who, when asked who had given it to him, answered in careful German that he could not remember. The Pope read it twice. Then he summoned his Secretary of State. Cardinal Valerius Hohenstein was 73 years old. He had survived 4 pontificates by understanding, before anyone else, in which direction the wind had begun to shift. He kept his office at a constant 19 degrees Celsius. He had not taken a vacation since 2009. He read the report. He folded it. He smiled a small, weary smile of a man who has explained difficult things to simple people for most of his adult life. He said, "Holy Father, these are market rates." He said, "The market is regrettable. The market is also, alas, the market." He said, "One must be careful. Holiness, not to let sentiment become policy." The Pope thanked him. He asked for the file to be left on his desk. He did not raise the subject again. For 6 days, in the marble antechambers where monsignors polished their cufflinks and exchanged information the way merchants exchange coins, it was understood that the new American had absorbed his first lesson. That he had been, as the older curia liked to say, ama estrato, tamed. They were wrong. He was simply waiting for a name, for a face, for a particular pair of hands. The anonymous letter, slid under the chapel door 3 days before that night, gave him all 3. One of them has polished your floors for 40 years. He did not yet know that her name was Maria. He did not know that she had a daughter in Latina who worked night shifts in a bakery, or that her husband had died in 2011 of a cancer the parish priest had described at the funeral as una malattia del silencio, an illness of silence, because Salvatore Esposito had not, in 18 months, complained. He did not know any of this yet, but he knew the corridor existed. He knew the cardboard existed. And he had decided, sitting on the edge of an unslept bed, that before he said another mass in that palace, he would see them with his own eyes. He took the service stairs, the narrow ones, travertine, fluorescent tubes, the smell of dust and old paper. He told the night sergeant of the Swiss Guard only this: "I am going down to pray. Do not follow me." The young man stared at him. He nodded once, the small, precise nod of a man trained since the age of 19 to obey without comprehension. The Pope walked down 4 flights. The temperature dropped with each landing. He felt it first in his fingers, then in the bridge of his nose. The radiator in the east wing of the substructure had not worked since the 14th of November. A maintenance ticket had been opened, ignored, and downgraded to Priority C, which in the internal classification of the Floraria Apostolica meant to be addressed when budgetarily feasible. It was now the 17th. At the bottom of the stairs, the corridor opened into a vaulted service passage. Low ceiling, flickering bulbs. Somewhere, water dripping onto stone in a slow, irregular rhythm, the way a clock keeps time when it is dying. He passed a door marked laundry. He passed a door marked linen. He stopped at a third door with no marking at all, only a small handwritten sign in a woman's hand. Please close gently. People are sleeping. He stood in front of that door for the length of 3 Hail Marys. Then he opened it. The room beyond was perhaps 6 meters by 4. An old coal store, the walls still bore the dark blooming of soot under the whitewash. A single bare bulb hung from a flex. Along one wall ran a hot water pipe, thick as a man's arm, and against this pipe, in the narrow strip of warmth it provided, 4 women were sleeping. They were sleeping on flattened cardboard boxes. The boxes had once contained mineral water, photocopier paper, and votive candles. They had been cut open, smoothed flat, laid in overlapping rectangles on the cement floor. On top of the cardboard, the women had spread thin, much-washed blankets, the kind given out by Italian civil protection after earthquakes. 3 of them had taken off their shoes. The 4th had not. Her shoes were brown leather, cracked across the toe, and from beneath the sole of the right one, a small tongue of cardboard insole protruded where it had been cut to fit. The Pope stood in the doorway and did not move. He understood, with a clarity that arrived in his chest like a slow blade, that any sound on his part, any cleared throat, any whispered Fili mie, would be a kind of theft. These women had stolen 40 minutes of sleep from a life that did not give it freely. He would not be the man who took those 40 minutes back. He stood there and counted breaths. Theirs, not his. The smell in the room was the smell of cheap industrial soap, of damp wool, of bodies that had worked 9 hours in unventilated corridors. Beneath all of this, the faint, sweet, ecclesiastical smell of beeswax, which clung to the clothes of anyone who polished altars for a living and which no detergent in the world had ever been able to remove. He looked at their faces. The first woman was perhaps 60. Filipina, he thought, by the shape of the cheekbones. The second was younger, dark-haired, with a small silver cross at her throat that rose and fell with her breathing. The third had her face turned to the wall. The 4th was Maria. He did not yet know it was Maria. He saw only an old woman, small, gray-haired, her hands folded against her chest the way a child folds them in catechism class. The knuckles were swollen. The nails were cut short and square. Across the back of the right hand ran a long, pale scar, the kind left by a fall onto wet marble, perhaps 30 years earlier. On her left wrist, she wore a thin elastic band. Tucked under the band was a folded square of paper. He could see, from where he stood, that it was an electricity bill. He would learn the rest the next afternoon, from a file Cardinal Hohenstein, with the tight courtesy of a defeated man, would place on his desk. That her full name was Maria Concetta Esposito. that she had begun working in the Apostolic Palace on the 3rd of October, 1985, at the age of 32, on a contract that had been renewed year after year through 4 different intermediary companies, each of which had subtly reduced the conditions of the previous one. That her current monthly take-home pay, after deductions, was 682 euros. That her rent was 440. That her gas bill for October had been 173 euros and 40 cents, and that she had not paid it, and that the supplier had issued, on the 11th of November, a formal notice of disconnection to take effect on the 22nd. On the night the Pope stood in the doorway of that small, warm, shameful room, Maria Esposito had 5 days left before her heating was cut off. He stood there for what he would later estimate to be 11 minutes. He did not pray, not in any formal sense. He did not move his lips. He did not finger the rosary in his pocket. He simply looked and let the looking become a kind of prayer, the kind that does not ask God for anything because it is too busy apologizing on God's behalf. Then, very quietly, he closed the door. He walked down the corridor. He found the alcove where the cleaning carts were parked, 6 of them in a row, each labeled with a strip of masking tape bearing a first name: Lourdes, Imelda, Adais, Maria, Radica, Joy. On Maria's cart lay a pair of reading glasses with one arm repaired by a strip of surgical tape, and a small thermos with a faded image of the Madonna of Pompeii on its side. He looked at the thermos for a long time. Then he climbed the stairs. He did not return to his apartment. He went, instead, to the small private chapel adjoining it, and he knelt on the stone floor, and he stayed there, in the dark, until the bells of St. Peter's rang 4. At 4:15, he rang for his secretary. He gave 3 instructions. The first concerned the schedule for that morning. The second concerned the dining hall of the Apostolic Palace, known as the Sala Clementina, and the breakfast that would be served there at 8 o'clock. The third concerned a small list of names, which he wrote out himself, in clear capital letters, on a sheet of cream-colored paper. The first name on the list was Cardinal Valerius Hohenstein. At 7:55 a.m., in the Sala Clementina, beneath the frescoes of Pope Clement VIII and the gilded coffered ceiling restored at a cost of 1.2 million euros in 2018, 23 of the highest-ranking prelates of the Roman Curia stood in a loose, uncertain semicircle, dressed in choir cassock and scarlet mozzetta, waiting for a mass that was not going to happen. They had been informed, at 6 in the morning, that the Holy Father had altered the protocol. They had not been informed how. Cardinal Hohenstein stood near the central window. He was a tall man, 73 years old, with the still, watchful face of someone who had survived 4 pontificates by understanding, before anyone else, in which direction the wind had begun to shift. He held his pectoral cross in his left hand, not for piety, but for the small physical comfort of holding something heavy. At 8 o'clock exactly, the doors at the far end of the hall opened. Pope Leo XIV entered. He was not wearing the white cassock of state. He was wearing a long white apron over a plain black soutane. The apron was the kind used in institutional kitchens. It had a small, faint stain of tomato near the hem. Behind him, 2 by 2, walked 6 women. They wore their work clothes, gray tunics, black trousers, cheap rubber-soled shoes. Their hair was pinned back. 3 of them had been crying. One of them, the youngest, was visibly trembling. The last of them, walking a little slower than the others because of her hip, was Maria Esposito. Behind the women came 4 members of the kitchen staff, pushing 2 long trolleys. On the trolleys were silver platters. On the platters were bread, butter, prosciutto, fresh ricotta, soft eggs, oranges sliced thin, a clay pitcher of hot milk, a bronze pot of coffee, and a single large bowl of honey from the Vatican's own apiary in Castel Gandolfo, the wax of which had, for decades, been used to make the candles that women like Maria polished off the floors of that very palace. The Pope walked to the head of the long table. He did not sit. He spoke. He spoke quietly. He did not raise his voice once during what followed. The acoustics of the Sala Clementina, designed in the 17th century to carry the words of popes to ambassadors, carried his voice without effort to every corner of the room. He said, "Brothers, this morning we will not celebrate the Mass that was scheduled." He said, "This morning, before any of us breaks bread at any altar, we will break bread here, together, with these women, whose names some of us, including myself, until last night, did not know." He said, "I will ask you now to remove your mozetas, to roll up the sleeves of your cassocks, to take from the trolleys the platters that have been prepared, and to serve, with your own hands, breakfast to our sisters who have, for years, served us with theirs." There was a silence. It was the kind of silence that has weight, that presses on the inside of the ears, that makes men aware of the sound of their own swallowing. Cardinal Hohenstein did not move. The Pope turned his eyes to him. He said, still quietly, "Valerius, you will serve Signora Esposito." He did not say it as an order. He said it as a fact, the way a doctor names a diagnosis, the way a judge reads a verdict that has already, in the higher court of conscience, been pronounced. Cardinal Hohenstein stood very still. for perhaps 4 seconds. The entire institutional weight of 19 centuries gathered itself behind his shoulders and considered, in the small private chamber of his pride, the possibility of refusal. Then he reached up. He undid the clasp of his mozzetta. He folded it with the same precise care with which he had, for 50 years, folded napkins at diplomatic dinners, and he laid it across the back of a chair. He rolled up the sleeves of his choir cassock to the elbow. His forearms were thin, white, freckled with the brown spots of age. He walked to the trolley. He took a plate. He placed on it 2 slices of bread, a small portion of ricotta, a curl of prosciutto, half an orange. He took a cup. He filled it with hot milk, then with coffee, in the proportion of 2 to 1, which was the proportion he himself preferred, and which he had not, in that moment, thought to ask about. He carried the plate and the cup across the Sala Clementina. Maria Esposito stood very still. Her hands were folded, again, against her chest. Her eyes were on the floor, on the marble she had polished, in that same hall, on the 11th, the 14th, and the 16th of that month. Cardinal Hohenstein stopped in front of her. He did not know what to say. In 4 languages, in 50 years of diplomacy, in countless audiences with kings and presidents, he had never not known what to say. He said, in a voice that did not sound like his own, "Signora, please, sit." He pulled out a chair. The chair was upholstered in red damask, embroidered with the keys of St. Peter. It had been sat in, over the centuries, by emperors. Maria sat. Her feet, in their cracked brown shoes, did not quite reach the floor. The cardinal placed the plate before her. He placed the cup beside it. His hands shook slightly. He did not try to hide it. He said, "Forgive me." He said it in Italian. He said it without any of the particles of formal address. "Mi perdoni." Not signora. Not madre. Just forgive me. Maria looked up. She looked into his face for a long moment. She had a face that had seen a great many things and had learned, decades earlier, not to react to most of them. She said, very softly, "Eminenza, the coffee is getting cold." That was all. She picked up the cup. Her hand, the one with the long pale scar, was steady. She drank. Around the hall, the other cardinals had begun, slowly, awkwardly, to move. Cardinal Okonkwo of the dicastery for evangelization carried a plate to Joy, a 34-year-old Nigerian woman who had been in Rome for 11 years and had not, in that time, ever sat down inside the palace. Cardinal Marini of the Apostolic Signatura, who had been knighted by 3 governments, knelt to pour milk for Lourdes, who was 61 and from Cebu, and who put her hand on his shoulder, gently, the way one steadies a child. Cardinal Hohenstein remained standing behind Maria's chair, his sleeves rolled, his cross hanging forgotten against his chest, looking at nothing. The Pope did not eat. He stood at the head of the table and watched. He watched the way a parent watches a child take its first unaided steps, without intervention, without applause, with a stillness that is itself the deepest form of presence. When Maria had finished half of her bread, he spoke again. He spoke in the same quiet voice. He said, "From this morning, the contracts of the cleaning staff of the Apostolic Palace are revoked." He said they will be replaced, by the end of this week, with direct employment by the Governorate of Vatican City State, at a wage no lower than the median wage of the Diocese of Rome, with full health coverage, paid leave, and a 13th and 14th month. He said a fund, drawn from the budget of the dicastery for the economy, will cover the unpaid utility bills of every member of this staff from the past 12 months. He said the room beneath the east wing, the one with the cardboard, will be sealed tomorrow. A proper rest area will be built in its place, with beds, with showers, with heat. He paused. The pause was not for effect. It was the pause of a man who needed, briefly, to remember how to breathe. Then he said, "And Cardinal Hohenstein, after this breakfast, will remain in this hall. He and I will have a conversation about how, in the budget that he has prepared with such diligence, none of these things, until today, was possible." Cardinal Hohenstein bowed his head. He did not protest. He did not explain. The defense he had carried in his mouth for 50 years, the defense of regrettable markets and unfortunate compliances, had, somewhere between the cardboard room and the red damask chair, quietly died. The story did not end that morning. The institution did not, in a single breakfast, become what it should always have been. Stories that end like that are stories for children and for press releases. The truth was slower, and harder, and in some ways more beautiful. In the weeks that followed, the new contracts were signed. The room beneath the east wing was sealed. The cardboard was burned in the incinerator behind the governorate, in a small, unceremonial fire that no photographer recorded. The bills were paid. The radiator in the east wing, the one that had not worked since the 14th of November, was repaired on the 18th by a Roman plumber named Gianni who, when asked about it later, would only say that he had received a phone call at 6 a.m. from a man with an American accent who had said, simply, "Per favore." Maria Esposito received At the end of that month, a salary of 1,620 euros. She received, with it, a letter on plain paper, signed by hand. The letter contained no titles. It contained 4 lines. The first line read, "Maria, forgive us for 40 years of silence." The second line read, "Your apartment will be warm this winter." The third line read, "If you wish to retire, you may do so tomorrow, with full pension." The fourth line read, "If you wish to continue, I will consider it a grace." She continued. She continued because the floors, she said to her daughter on the telephone that night, were not the problem. The floors had never been the problem. The problem had been being invisible while polishing them. And she was, she said, in a voice her daughter had not heard in 20 years, no longer invisible. She worked for 3 more years. She retired in the spring of the year that followed those 3. At her retirement, in a small ceremony in the Cortile del Belvedere, attended by 11 cardinals and 42 cleaners, the Pope kissed her hands. Both of them. The one with the scar and the one without. She died, peacefully, in the autumn of the year after that, in a warm room, in her own bed, in Tor Pignatara. Cardinal Hohenstein submitted his resignation as prefect of the dicastery for the economy on the morning of the 18th of November, the day after the breakfast. The Pope refused it. He told him, in a private audience that lasted 40 minutes, that penance was not a transfer of office. That penance was the doing, daily, of the work one had previously done badly, with the memory of having done it badly held openly in the hand. The cardinal returned to his desk. He kept, from that day, in the top drawer of that desk, a small folded square of cardboard cut from a flattened mineral water box. No one ever asked him what it was. He never explained. The anonymous letter was never traced. There were rumors. There always are. A certain Monsignor in the Secretariat was said to have a manual typewriter with a slightly skewed lowercase e. He denied it, when asked, with a small smile. The Pope, when asked, said only that he did not need to know, that the Holy Spirit, in his experience, often used office supplies. This is where the story passes out of the Vatican and into your hands. Because the truth is this: there are basements beneath every great institution on earth. There are corridors with flickering bulbs. There are women on cardboard, men on cardboard, children whose names appear on no plaque and in no annual report. They polish our floors. They harvest our fruit. They clean our hospitals at 3 a.m. while we sleep above them in heated rooms. Maria Esposito had one pope willing to walk down 4 flights of stairs for her. Most of them have no one. So here is what I am asking of you. Indifference is the marble out of which every cold palace in every century has been built. And palaces, as Maria knew, on her knees, in the dark, can be cleaned. But they can also, when enough ordinary people decide it, be opened. If you believe the invisible people who carry our institutions deserve to be seen, leave a mark on this video. Hit the like